And the chip sector is today reacting to the latest results from Marvell Technology. Earnings and revenue beat estimates, but the numbers weren't good enough to impress investors. The stock is getting slammed. Sector's not doing very well, but the market obviously overall is weak. Joining us now, Chris Miller, a professor at the Tufts Fletcher School and the author of Chip War, the fight for the world's most critical technology. How'd you like if I started asking you questions about technical support levels and where's Marvell going from here and what kind of earnings growth you're looking for? That's not why you're here, I don't think, Chris. But as someone that studies the entire industry, do you think anything has changed just in the last couple of months about how positive the trends are for most of the group because of AI? Has anything changed, or this is the way markets move?
Look, I think the AI trajectory is still very positive, but the policy outlook, the macro uncertainty, the trade uncertainty, that's going to inevitably hang over semiconductor companies because they're so trade dependent. And so if you see consumers starting to pull back on consumer electronics, if you see trade uncertainty calling into question investment and trade flows, that is going to inevitably impact semiconductors. I think that's part of what we're seeing right now.
There's some cross currents, too, because obviously we're fearful of China long term, or I don't know whether fearful is the right word, but we want to take steps to maybe counter some of their moves. So we don't want to give them everything we have, all of our technology, because they steal it anyway. So that's probably a negative. But then you have something like TSMC with that big investment. You've got other manufacturers announcing some big plans here. Net, are things moving forward in a good way for the United States or backward for the chip sector here?
I think the TSMC announcement was obviously a major step forward, a huge expansion of that company's manufacturing plans in the U.S., although we don't really know the details yet from them about what time horizon that investment will be made over. But I think there are also some potentially worrisome signs. I mentioned the trade uncertainty, which the sector is certainly worried about. There's been a lot of discussion about semiconductor specific tariffs from Washington, which, if implemented, depending on how they're implemented, could have a major impact. And there's also discussion about pulling back some of the CHIPS Act funding, which benefited certain companies, and they've made manufacturing decisions around that. And if that is pulled back, that will certainly impact their manufacturing plans as well. And so I think what the industry wants is more clarity and certainty around the policymaking environment, and that's what they're not getting right now.
You heard the president talk about the CHIPS Act, none too favorably the other night. There was some bipartisan support for it, but then, we have seen. I mean, I wouldn't summarize the entire act with what happened with Intel. But it is difficult for the government to pick winners and losers, and more often than not. I mean, it's nice to get some public-private partnerships in an important industry, but has it been a great success? Do you think we should look at it and say, "Wow, that was actually good legislation coming out of Washington"?
I think it's ironic to hear President Trump criticize the act because it was his administration that set it in motion to being passed. And if you look at TSMC's investments in Arizona, which began under his first term, they would not have happened in the absence of the tax credits and the incentives that the CHIPS Act provided. So certainly Intel is not a success story right now, but TSMC is. And I think you can point to other examples of investments that definitely would not have been made in the absence of those tax credits and incentives. And right now in Congress, there's a decision, should you extend the tax credits that make manufacturing in the U.S. more competitive for semiconductors and other semiconductor supply chain activities? And if those aren't extended, I think you should expect a reduction in investment relative to what we've seen in the last couple of years.
Hey, Chris, we've seen Apple obviously make a big announcement, $500 billion announcement. You also saw it from Stargate. Do you think that there's going to be carve-outs therefore for companies like that in terms of the other businesses that they have where they're importing goods?
I think that's possible. I think when you start thinking about what do those carve-outs look like, they get mind-bogglingly expensive. There are tens of thousands of components in an NVIDIA server, for example, that might be assembled in a new plant that's being built in Texas. Even if the chips are made domestically, many of the other components are not. And so just the complexity of the supply chains makes devising a tariff policy around carve-outs very, very difficult, which is why the industry is hoping there won't be any changes at all, because they've been structured around the assumption that you can move goods back and forth across borders without this type of tariff uncertainty.